All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the createTED podcast. And I'm really excited about this episode. Before I introduce our guest, Kim Clark, I wanted to just ask you a question. Have you ever had a moment in life where you think, this might be a moment I need to look back on, a moment where maybe a pivot started, something that just changed for you? Well, I want you to sit back and hold on because I think this episode has a potential to be one of those moments for you. I know just in preparing for it, it's already been that for me. So, with that being said, let me jump in and just welcome Kim Clark as our guest today. So, Kim, thank you for joining.
Great to be here, Ted. Thank you.
And so, for our audience members, Kim is one of the authors of the book Leading Through Activating the Soul, Heart, and Mind of Leadership. He co authored that book with his son Jonathan and his daughter Erin. And just briefly, part of Kim's background, he served as the dean of the Harvard Business School. He was the 15th president of BYU-Idaho, Brigham Young University-Idaho. He served as a general authority of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He served as the Commissioner of Education while during that time, and he is currently a distinguished professor of management at Brigham Young University. So thank you again for joining this show. And for listeners, I want to lay this out what's happened. Normally, when preparing for an episode, I'll come up with a list of questions of what I want to cover. And I'm really looking forward to, I was putting a list of questions together to ask him about. And then something happened going through and preparing. And I haven't shared this with Kim yet, but I'm going to explain kind of what happened. I've read the book and have really enjoyed leading through. I love this concept of, you know, the soul, heart, and mind of leadership, and the concept of bringing in institutional light into a business setting. And I decided to throw into ChatGPT, hey, give me a good recap, because I'd gone and looked at the chapter summaries again, and I wanted to have what was there. And knowing that we're dealing with a creative audience, I'm like, okay, well, what would the soul, heart, and mind of leadership look like for someone who's creative? And as I started to look at that, I had this epiphany, this thought: change the word leadership to creativity, and change the word leader to creative or creator. Totally blew my mind. And then at that moment, I realized the book, like I already loved the book. I really it was resonating with me because I love to study leadership. But it started to sit at a whole new level because I'm like, oh wow. Yeah, these same principles apply very much when I'm in my creative sphere. And so, I still have a lot of questions that I want to talk about, but I wanted to help listeners kind of understand, how did we get to the heart or the soul, the heart and the mind of our creativity. And I thought maybe one place we could start, Kim, is just having you help listeners kind of understand when it says the soul, heart, and mind of leadership. What does that mean?
So that I think the starting point is to recognize that a very important part of leadership is personal, and therefore it has to do with relationships. It's about relationships between people, typically, sometimes relationships between a leader and a small group. And because of that, um, we looked for a metaphor that could help us capture the essence of what makes for the kind of leadership that we envisioned on the personal side. So for us, as we wrestled with, like, what do we think leadership is? By the way, it took us about 6 years to write this book. Lots of stuff going on. I'll come back and comment about that, about your comment about creativity in a minute. But we decided that for us, leadership is a kind of work. It's the work of mobilizing people in a process of action, learning, and change to improve the long-term viability, vitality of the organization you're part of in three ways. One is you help people find meaning and purpose. You realize the ultimate purpose of the organization more effectively, and you improve the productivity, the performance of the organization. So with that, in that spirit, we looked at, okay, what's the role of the personal side? And we decided that these three metaphors, soul, heart, mind, capture in an important way the personal dimension of leadership. But there's an important second idea that came to us as we worked on that, which was we wanted to make sure that people understood that where it has real power is in an organization, is if it permeates the organization. If everyone has the work of leadership to do and they do it with soul, heart, and mind. So that's kind of where it got started. And of course, soul, heart, and mind have different dimensions, which I'd be happy to share, but that's where it started.
Awesome. Thank you. And I love that concept of everyone is a leader. And in other settings, heard you and others mention that concept of leadership with a little L, to
Yeah.
where regardless of where you are. And I
It's
think,
not about position or prominence. It's about the nature of the work. And people have the work of leadership to do everywhere.
yeah. And I love that we're able to talk about this on this show because I think even in a creative sphere, whether you're a creative team of one or you've got a larger organization, there's a lot of leading that you can do just in the creative industry, but also within just your own work and finding ways to bring in light and drive out darkness.
Yeah. Let me just say one word about why about your epiphany. Okay.
Oh yeah, please.
A similar kind of epiphany along the way, which is we realize that leadership is creative work. It's in a different sphere typically, but it's creative work and it requires creativity and many of the same skills that you find in people who are very creative or engaged in creative work have their analog in leadership. So it's not
Yeah,
surprising you saw that
yeah.
connection.
That's awesome. And that like those are two things I really enjoy is creativity and leadership. So that's nice to hear because and I think sometimes with like the creative people I know, they don't view themselves as leaders. They're like, oh, I'm just doing my thing. But a lot of them, when you get them talking about their work and they're passionate about it, other people want to jump in and either support them or do what they're doing, and there's just an enthusiasm that comes from that.
Yeah, yeah. And in some creative domains, it's not a single person, it's a team,
Yeah,
like animated movies.
yeah,
It
yeah. I
takes a
mean,
whole lot of people.
it certainly does. I mean, that list at the end of movies is getting longer and longer. So if you're sitting there waiting for the post credits scenes to come up, you've got to wait a while because that is a huge team. Excuse me. One question I had is, and this is about the book, but why write this book and why write it now?
Um, so we, all three of us, in our separate ways, in our activities that we were involved in, had come to sort of a couple of really important ideas to us personally. One was the great need for leadership, and the second one was the fact that there are so many organizations where you don't find great leadership. In fact, I saw a story in the Wall Street Journal not long ago. The title was, Why Are There So Few Great Leaders?
Hmm.
And so we felt, wow, this is really important. Uh, it's it's despite the fact there have been thousands of books written about leadership, that it hasn't really moved the needle that much. The same things that were said, in the 1920s are said today about the need for leadership. It seems like every decade or so, people start worrying about we need better leaders, better leadership. So we knew that it was a really ongoing, important problem, and we all had been thinking about how we felt about leadership, the kind of work we were trying to do, what we'd learned from our own experience. All of us, all three of us have had leadership experiences that have affected how we think about it. And we just decided, we started talking to each other at family dinners and stuff. Decided, we got to write a book about this. Uh, but remember, we started this in 2018,
Hmm.
and we didn't think, oh, let's write a book that will hit publication in 2024. That's
Wow.
not, that was not our plan. But we just started working on it, and as we got into it, we realized that it was a deep problem, and we needed to really work on it. And we probably wrote the book about 4 times, just because, and that's why, because that works creative.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, you're trying to craft this book and craft ideas, and it just took a while to really get down to the essence. And we knew that in the end, we had to hit a certain page limit that our publisher had given us. And it meant the book would not be we couldn't write a tome, like a 500-page book. It just wasn't going
Yeah.
to work. And so it took a long time to distill things down, get the essence. And we ended up, in 2024. I
Yeah.
think we finished writing the book. Well, I know we did. We finished writing the book in 2023, but it went through a lot of, editorial stuff and all sorts of things that are involved in book publishing these days, and stretched into 2024, and then production takes several months, and then eventually you have books.
Yeah. Thanks. I really appreciate that you shared the process that you went through to get there. Because a lot of times when we look at there's a book on the shelf, we're like, oh, that book, that's a great book. We forget all the stuff that goes into it. So knowing that it started in 2018 and the
Yeah,
idea started over family dinners, just having conversations with uh, people that you want to collaborate with. For you, it happened to be a son and a daughter.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
love that's just where ideas start sometimes, just over a simple conversation.
yeah, yeah. It's exactly what happened.
So let's jump back. You had hinted we'll jump back to it, but now that we've kind of hit, this soul, heart, and mind of leadership, I'll throw out a couple things that, when I threw it into ChatGPT and started thinking a little bit more, what, for in that lens of creativity, what is that? What's the soul, the heart, and the mind of creativity? And starting with the soul, that really just feels like understanding what your purpose is, why you're doing that whatever creative endeavor you're going on, whether you're a painter or a writer, why you're doing that. And then briefly with the heart, I mean, that's where the passion and the connecting with others and the people who are interested in that. And then the mind, and this is the one that's I think is so important, especially with creatives, is the discipline and to keep doing the work, but then being willing to make strategic choices that help you do that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think one way to think about this in the context of creative work is that the soul begins with the idea that the whole purpose of the endeavor is to make things better, is to do good. And then people ought to say, well, like, who decides what's good? And our formulation of that was to say, well, we begin with what we think of as universal values. That is, values that are found in every society, in every time, in every place. These are fundamental human values that are essential to cooperation and to the human endeavor. And we advocate in the book that organizations decide what of those significant universal values? Which are the few that stand out to you as being really significant for your particular objective, the particular thing you're trying to do and to make better? And in creative work, I think that that may sometimes be implicit,
Mm.
but creative people have that. They have these values that drive them. Not just creative, that is, values in sense of the way their work is going to be received by others, but things that are intrinsic to them, the things that they believe in, and that the organizations they're part of believe in. And you can see that organizations that have successfully pursued a kind of creative, if you will, signature that is characteristic of the organization, that it has, decided what it's all grounded in values. And the soul, that's what the soul of leadership is about, is trying to do good. And that means in an organization dealing with human beings, you need to create what we call a moral context, which are grounded in those values. And that's where organizational light comes from.
Mm.
And of course, organizational darkness.
Yeah, and I love those concepts, and I've got a question around bringing in organizational light and driving out organizational darkness that I'll
Yeah.
ask in a little bit. Um, so we talked a little bit about the soul. What about, when we look at the heart of creativity?
So the heart for us is about helping people thrive. And so in creative work, you have to think about, as you said, like, why are you doing this? Apart
Mm.
from this, you kind of like doing it. And
Yeah,
usually it's for other people, usually.
yeah,
It's to create something that will be of benefit to other people and in fact will help them thrive. So in our formulation of it, we decided that the heart of leadership begins with love, inspiration, vitality, and expression. And you have analogs in the creative work that you do. The love is in an organizational sense because you're about leaders, you're about working with people. The love is about the care and concern you have for other people. And that probably translates into creative work, although sometimes the creative work, so there's some creative people who just say, well, I want to make my imprint and I don't really care whether anybody likes it.
yeah,
But the people who really change the world, the creative people who change the world, they have something else in mind, which is, I want to change the world. I want to do something that will inspire people or will, well, inspire them to to lift them or inspire them to do something or just entertain them in a positive way and cause them to think differently than they think, or will show them a way to see themselves and the world they live in a different light, or be able to have experiences that will lift and strengthen them or cause them to see things differently and change the way they do things and whatnot, right?
yeah,
And that's the heart. It's love, it's inspiration, it's vitality, it's expression.
yeah. Thank you for explaining that. That's that love. And the thing I like the most that you said is that desire to change the world. Because a
Yeah,
lot of the creatives I meet, they want to make an impact on the world. There's a problem that they see in the world that they want to solve, and they
right,
want to provide insight and an answer to how to either solve that problem or how to make sense of that problem.
right, right. I'm sure you're aware, and lots of your listeners are aware that the concept of design has really swept throughout a lot of human endeavor these days. People realize that the principles of design, the very idea of design, actually shows up in human activity, and can show up in a very productive way in human activity. But it's all about changing the way the world works.
Yeah,
It's how do we change this so that the world works differently and better. And once you start down that path, you are in the heart of leadership and the heart of creativity.
yeah. I mean, for me, that's whether it's, the work that I'm doing as in the title, an instructional designer, and I've been doing that for, around 20 years now, and even in the creative works that I do, like wanting to change the world in some way so it can benefit people. I mean, that drives me.
Yeah.
So it's this everyone, this is food for my soul. So if there, I know this will benefit a lot of our listeners, but this is a huge benefit to me too. Well, let's jump on to kind of the mind of creativity.
Okay. So the analog for us in leadership is that, by the way, and this is what most people think leadership is the mind. That this is, as you mentioned, this is the world of uh, planning, organizing, managing, strategy, uh, analysis, doing the kind of things that, are the stuff and substance about trying to achieve an objective. And we identify three phases: initiate, mobilize, and empower. And the idea is these are very simple ideas and they apply directly to creative work.
Right.
The initiate is to identify an opportunity or a threat, a problem or something that is an opportunity to be seized. And that identification then involves kind of reflection and sometimes in business collecting data, or in the creative world, it's, like in your world, it's about understanding, well, what is this course supposed to do? Like what's the opportunity? There isn't, oh, there isn't a course on this. But it could be really, really a powerful idea experience for people. Or, well, we've got this current thing, but it's not working very well. What's wrong with it? And so forth.
Yeah.
And you identify, and then we do what we call socialize and connect. And the socialize is inherent in an organizational setting where it's a fancy word for like talk to people
Mm.
and share your idea. I'm thinking about this. What do you think? I see this as, do you think I'm seeing this right? It looks to me like it's an opportunity here,
Yeah.
you know, and I think this could be really good. And sometimes it's just a conversation creative people have with themselves or with their muse, if they have a muse
Mm.
they talk to. Uh, and then comes mobilize. And mobilize is you figure out, okay, what are the resources I need to actually seize the opportunity? Like, what do I need? What can I draw upon? Sometimes it's people, sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's other kinds of resources, ideas, whatever. Uh, and in a creative world, you have to decide, well, what are you, are you a poet and you're trying to, you see something that's in your heart or some opportunity you think could really change how people see it, and then sort of what are the resources you need? Well, it's not just you sitting there with, pen and like on your computer or something. It's like you got to go. Sometimes poets research,
Mhm.
they they read, they ponder, they try to draw ideas from people who've written other things. They go for walks in the woods. There's all sorts of
Oh
things
yeah.
that people do to kind of get the ideas flowing, but they're searching for resources and mobilizing them in their minds or even in the team that they're working with.
Yeah.
And I've read the book that Ed Catmull, who founded Pixar,
Oh yeah.
about the creative process at Pixar. And that's exactly what it is. Once somebody gets an idea, they share it, but then they try to figure out putting a team together that could actually make this real. And then it's a whole process of, because it's not just saying, okay, I want you, you, and you. It's like, okay, here's the basic thing we're thinking about, but how do we actually formulate it in a way that there's clear direction and it's kind of focus and we can figure out what in a plan for moving forward. And then And then comes empower, and that's where in the leadership world, the leader's role is to kind of figure out what do people need, what kind of encouragement or support or resources or even discipline do they need to carry this thing out so we don't get we don't get distracted by stuff
Yeah.
coming, and so you would end up with something that's just a hodgepodge rather than a really great creative piece.
Yeah, we've gone through all three of those, and this is painting a really good picture. And it's all, for me, it's like you said, it's all ringing very true. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, the process I've gone through when I'm either working on a novel or I've got a friend who's working on a novel. They're going through all those processes. Um, Now I see writing conferences now in a whole new light,
Oh
because
yeah,
and writing groups, because
sure.
when people
I
go,
think
it's like,
sure,
hey, here's this
absolutely.
idea I have.
Yeah, and
So,
then you add it around. But I have a friend here, a woman that we got to know was in our congregation here in Heber. And she's a novelist. She taught English in high school here in town. She's a novelist and she's written some really great books. And she not only gets ideas from she has a writing group.
mhm,
She not only gets ideas, but she shares stuff with them. Okay, I'm working on this novel, and she shares stuff with them, and
yeah,
they critique it.
yeah,
And that's a really useful process. Now she's sort of responsible for the whole thing,
yeah,
but that's one way she mobilizes the team, mobilizes the resources that help her. But there are a lot of other because she writes about the last one. In fact, my wife and I just listened to the audiobook of one, which is it's about an art theft in the 1880s, I think,
oh wow,
in England. And it's fiction, but it's real clear that she did a lot of work to learn about, the art world of that time and about paintings
yeah,
and about how to look. So she had to do a lot of work. So I'm sure she did from books, from talking to people, she's mobilizing her resources. And then she goes to work and begins to empower the creative juices in her to actually turn it into something that really captures the experience she wants to create for people who read it.
yeah. I love that you shared that example because I'm hoping, especially to, well, I mean, painters but especially writers, just to see that the work that you're doing is good work and it's hard work, but that it's possible. I've got a daughter who's writing a novel that's set back in, I think, 1968 during the Vietnam War.
Yeah,
And she wasn't alive then,
I
but
was.
she's having to do a lot of research because she wants to get it right
Sure.
for the time period and the message she's trying to convey. So I think that example just really illustrates, you know, there there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there can be collaboration. And then, like you said, you just got to get to work after that. You've empowered those creative, uh, those creative skills and talents within yourself to be able to get the work done.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's discipline. And the great writers that I know of, they have learned how they work best. And they have a sort of a routine that they get into, and they get in. It's very disciplined.
Yeah,
There's a very important relationship between creativity and discipline. And they're very disciplined about what they do and how they work. And that's why they can write as much as they write.
yeah,
'Writing's hard. And if you try to do it all by yourself, like you never talk to anybody else, nobody ever reads what you're writing until you try to send it to a publisher, you miss out on building, mobilizing your team. And your daughter's team are like probably a lot of dead people who
yeah,
wrote books or
yeah,
had or wrote in or kept journals or magazine articles or newspapers or whatever. uh, that she uses. So that's her team. She
Yeah.
mobilizes all that stuff and then figures out how to distill it into a an experience for the reader, taking them back into that time with characters that they identify with, and so forth and so on.
And I think this applies equally to, whether it's painting or to someone who might be writing a fantasy novel. You know, they're
Of
they
course.
they
Oh,
still
yeah.
have to do the same amount of work.
Yeah, they have to create the world,
Yeah.
right?
I
They
mean,
have to create the world.
you look at Brandon Sanderson and everything he's created. That's a lot of work to get all that to be able to come up with that.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
I want to make not a complete pivot, but like I mentioned, the idea of the bringing in organizational light and driving out
Yeah.
organizational darkness
Yeah.
is I that really has resonated with me, and it's made me wonder and want to ask the question: as creatives, what can we do to be bringing in that light and driving out darkness in that organizational sense? And then a follow-up question well, let's go there and then I'll ask the follow-up question after
Okay.
that.
Okay. So there's a couple of things about organizational life that's really important. And because we all have experience with light, we have a lived analog that we can draw upon to kind of understand the organizational side. So organizational light is created by human action that lifts and strengthens other people. And when that action and the lifting and strengthening uh, is supported by and reinforced by a moral context,
Mm.
then you get organizational life. That is, it's not just one person, it's just the whole organization kind of works that way. And it begins with the values we talked about, and that begin to provide the context. And then people learn to live those values, but they have to actually take action to generate the light in the organization. And actually it's the analog with light is very powerful because the visible light that we experience allows sight. You can see. It allows for discernment. It actually carries power and energy, and it carries information, or can if you want it to.
Yeah.
So all of those things actually come through actions that we take in relation to other people. And we can help them see, we can help them trust, we can help them be like receive energy, spiritual, emotional energy, because we help lift them and so forth. Darkness is like the opposite.
Mm.
Darkness comes from human action that damages people, which, if you don't deal with it, creates a context that's like amoral or even immoral. And out of that comes a lot of damage to people and to relationships. It becomes dark because people can't see. In other words, there's so much uncertainty created by these actions that it's hard for them to see the future. It's hard for them to see what's going on, to trust what's happening around them. And so people feel uncertainty, they feel fear sometimes. They don't know, they become uncertain about the actions, and it's like darkness. So in a creative world, the if you're in an organization, of course, it's a direct application.
Yeah.
But in terms of creativity and creative work in general, I really believe you have an opportunity as someone who's creative to either generate light where your work will help people see the world around them differently, will perhaps even impel them to action that's positive and good and will uplift them, uh, create some emotional energy, and maybe and certainly may create information and knowledge that's really valuable to them. And so that kind of creative work is really light creating. They become creative people in that sense become light workers. They create light. That you can also create darkness. You know, you can degrade people.
Mm.
You can hurt people, damage their people. You can create work that makes people feel uncertain, feel fearful, feel, negative about life. And its whole purpose is to drag you down. And they may think that that's worthwhile, but it actually is just darkness. And personally, I hope everybody who's embarks on creative work wants to do things that really create light.
That's 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 amazing, Kim. Thank you. And when you were talking about the basics of organizational light and organizational darkness, the thing what it made me think about is when I'm writing, next time I'm working on a novel, that's the problems that I can put in there for characters to try to solve. There's going to be characters that's how they operate is through organizational darkness, and other characters who are operating on that mode of organizational light. And as one of the problems, the conflict throughout the story is that conflict between the actions of one person and the actions of another. And it's
Right.
just made me think of it in a different way.
Yeah. And, you know, some of the things that are most powerful in generating light are actually tragedies. I'm thinking of Shakespeare
Oh, yeah.
plays, where it's actually a tragedy, but what it does is it helps people, it awakens in people the recognition, oh, if I go down that road or if I behave that way, it's going to be tragic.
Yeah.
Here's where they could have changed. It's like, where could this have gone better? Why did it have to end in tragedy? Well, it's because people were subject to these human emotions or greed or, revenge or these negative emotions that they played out in their lives and it ended up in tragedy. And that's a very powerful experience for the people who are reading or watching or participating. It's not that everything has to be a Hallmark movie,
Yeah.
although Hallmark movies I really like, but not
Me too.
everything has to be tragic
Yeah.
either. But tragedy can be really instructive and generates light in that sense if people
Yeah.
really understand it. But there's some things that are like that, dark and so forth. They're
Yeah.
just plain dark.
Yeah.
There's no redeeming value in watching them. They just
Yeah.
take you into a realm and it's just dark. And that's their purpose. They want you to feel dark.
Yeah.
And there's no redeeming qualities or anything going on. There's no good characters. There's nothing that's redeeming. And some people like it just because it's entertaining and it appeals to their, the worst side of people.
Yeah.
And so it sells,
Mm-hmm.
like it sells. I'm reminded of, I don't know if you've ever been to Japan, but
Uh-uh.
if you ride around, at least when I was in there, which was years ago, right around the subways, you look at what people are reading, and people are reading all these graphic novels. And the graphic novels are absolutely horrible. They're horrible. And they're just horribly violent and, abuse of people. It's just horrible stuff. But people like it. They eat it up. They sell a lot of books, but it's darkness. It's dark. It appeals to people's like, the worst side of people, I think. Anyway, so I'll get off my soapbox.
That's okay. We all need soapbox moments every once in a while. And I want to follow up on that. Listeners of my show know that I'm a man of faith, that I believe in Christ. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, and as you've talked about light, it's made me just think about as creatives, how can we, I'm looking at my note here, how can we partner with Jesus Christ in our creative efforts?
So if you are a disciple of Christ, a believer in him, and seek to follow him, there are consequences for you personally that can lead to uh, tremendous impact on your creative work. I think, especially if you desire to make the world a better place, to change the world for good, because that's what he's about.
Yeah,
And so you'll get inspiration, you'll get help in the form of ideas, or I don't know, you'll be like, right, we've been talking a lot about writing, but
yeah,
you're working on a character and you're in a historical setting and you want it to be provocative and interesting, but also historically, you don't want to make the history up.
yeah,
And there's a certain thing you need to know. There's it's in history, and the history books say it says, but nobody knows what happened. And it's what happens. It's so essential to your book. So you either have to make it up or you have to find out what happened. And sometimes doors open
oh yeah,
and stuff pops up, and some obscure source somewhere that you just run across, and all of a sudden you track it down, blow and hold. There's somebody's journal that talks about what happened, and you find it, and it's like the lodestar for that character. And all of a sudden, your book kind of comes to life because now historically accurate. You have an historically accurate account, and you can document it, and it's incredible of what it does. That happens. It
yeah.
happens. Lord's very kind. He
Yes, he
loves
is.
he loves us, and it doesn't mean he's going to write your novel, but sometimes he'll help you
Yeah,
if you are working hard and you're saying your prayers and trying to do what's a good thing. You get amazing things happen. I mean, that happened in writing this book.
yeah.
Uh, it was often, very often, a really interesting experience. In fact, the whole soul, heart, and mind thing,
Uh-huh.
that's where that came. I'm trying
That
to
sounds like,
trying to figure it out and just
yeah,
sitting there, how can we capture this? And all of a sudden, whoop, oh. Now the people who don't believe in Christ, they
yeah,
chalk, well, that's just inspiration.
yeah,
Well, yeah, but everyone has the light of Christ.
yeah.
And the light of Christ is very powerful. And it helps us and teaches us truth and moves us toward the good everywhere, and beauty, good things. And so if you're faithful um, in your belief in Christ, he blesses you.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we are about at the end. I want to make it just a quick plug for your book. Um,
Okay, thank you.
and it's, again, the title is, wow, my brain just went, leading through. And wow, my brain is just,
I'll do it.
yeah, I'm going to let you do it because there's the one phrase I always forget. I just think leading through and then
So the
the soul
book
heart.
is called Leading Through, and it plays upon a distinction between power over people and leading through people by activating the power that's in them. And the subtitle is activating, which means activating the power in people in the soul, heart, and mind of leadership. So activating the soul, heart, and mind of leadership. That's the book. I recommend it.
I agree. And now I remembered I had one note now that we're done talking about the book. One thing you've talked about in other places is this concept of deep learning.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned that deep learning is learning with the whole soul, the mind, the heart, the body, and the spirit. When I was looking at that, I kind of smiled. I'm like, oh, it's that same kind of theme. But I'd be curious to know, what do you think, what does deep learning look like for a creative individual?
Oh, it's super important. And everybody who's been engaged in creative work will recognize it. Okay. The first level is knowledge, cognitive understanding, cognitive processing, analysis. It's where your knowledge of principles come in. Like I listened once to one of the great painters at BYU, Idaho, a man named Leon Parsons, a very
Oh yeah.
famous wildlife painter, and he can sit there for hours and talk to you about line and shadow and perspective and angle and all sorts of stuff that go into creating a great painting. So part of it's knowledge. Part of it is then another level is understanding of the heart. That is, it's what you feel about the knowledge you have and about the endeavor. It's what are your commitments, your desires, your loyalties, your deepest hopes and emotional attachments to this work. And so you understand it at a deeper level, at the level of your heart. And the third is learning how to take effective righteous action, meaning effective in the sense it produces a great result,
Mm,
righteous in the sense that it conforms to these principles that you know are right, and that are absolutely essential to the creation of great work. And the third is more about becoming,
mm,
where your engagement in this creative work becomes part of your identity. And of course, these things I've given the four, but they don't all happen in sequence.
mm.
They're very interactive. But ultimately, your very nature of who you are as a human being, what your identity is shaped by these experiences you have of knowing, understanding, and feeling, doing over and over again.
Mm.
You become a writer. It's not writing is not just something you do, it's something you become. And you internalize and incorporate all these experiences into who you are as a person.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, everyone, I hope you have enjoyed this episode as much as I have. Kim, it really has been a pleasure, and thank you for being on the show today.
My pleasure.
And listeners, we'll see you on the next episode.